Good afternoon, and welcome to Duke Law School to those who are not usually within these walls. It's good to see a number of people from the community as well as our own students and faculty. And welcome, of course, to Mr. Ambassador Daniel Ayalon. This spring is a time that, for many reasons, there is guarded hope that the suffering of the peoples of the Middle East might be alleviated through real progress toward their elusive goal of peace. In this context, it is a tremendous honor for me to be able to welcome His Excellency Daniel Ayalon, Ambassador of Israel, to Duke University. Ambassador Ayalon has been at the forefront of developing economic, political, and diplomatic relations between the United States and Israel, relations that might play a constructive role in making progress toward peace in the Middle East. The ambassador has played a leading role in the negotiations for the roadmap to peace and Israel's disengagement plan, including the exchange of letters on April 14, 2004, between President Bush and Prime Minister Sharon. Prior to his current appointment, Ambassador Ayalon served the last 3 consecutive Israeli administrations, most recently as the chief foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. From 1997 to 2001, Ambassador Ayalon was the deputy foreign policy advisor to former Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Benjamin Netanyahu, during which time he was a member of the Israeli delegations to the Sharm el-Sheikh, Y Plantation, and Camp David summits. Ambassador Ayalon served in New York from 1993 to 1997 as the director of the Bureau of Israel's ambassador to the UN and as deputy chief of mission in Panama from 1991 to 1992. Born in 1955, he is as young as he looks, Ambassador Ayalon is a native of Tel Aviv. He is a graduate of Tel Aviv University's economics department and holds an MBA from the University of Bowling Green in Ohio. He is a retired captain in the Armored Corps of the Israeli Defense Forces. Again, it is a true pleasure to host someone of his stature, position, accomplishment, and insight to Duke University. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Daniel Ayalon.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Dean, for this very kind introduction. And I want to thank also Professor Schroeder for the invitation and the meeting here. I am very privileged and honored to have here President Broadhead and Mrs. Broadhead. Thank you very much for coming. It is really a pleasure to be here. Let me start by maybe expressing a condolences for the loss yesterday to North Carolina. And I understand you have a chance to get even tonight with the women's play. So I'm all here looking forward for a good game. I also want to thank my very good friend Peter Kahn, which is, I think, does really honor. He is a graduate from Duke Law School, a prominent lawyer in Washington, D.C., a good friend, a good advisor, and it's always good to have him here. Also in the Board of Trustees here of the school. Let me start by saying that it is a privilege for me to serve my country in Washington. I find Washington is a very friendly place, not only friendly in a personal way, but it's also very friendly for Israelis, and particularly at this time. I think that the bond between our two countries have never been stronger. And what really binds our two countries, the United States, which is the greatest democracy, the greatest country on earth, and Israel, which is a very small country, but still a very great democracy in the Middle East, what binds us together is a tradition and history of shared values, values of promoting individual dignity and freedoms and democracy and open markets. All these are so very important and crucial, especially at this day and age, when we know what happens in the absence of holding and promoting these values. Also, we are bound by interest, the interest of promoting peace and stability and disarmament and free economy and prosperity into the region. Unfortunately, after 9/11, there is another element which keeps us very, very closely together, and that is the war on terrorism. The United States have experienced this trauma on 9/11. I must say here, as a spectator, the United States was very brave in dealing with this trauma. And also, we share your determination as American people, not just the administration or Congress, but the American people, not to give up to terrorism, understanding that terrorists attack us not because of what we do. Heavens knows that our policies were always extending our hand, trying to accommodate, trying to make concessions and to trade concessions so we can accommodate everybody, but because of what we are and who we represent. And those who are perpetrating these attacks, those who motivate them, come from a very, very fundamental background and a devious one, which manipulates and corrupts the teaching of their own religion. It's a very small group, but we see that it could be very appealing to sometimes larger crowds. And in order to make sure that we can confront them, it's a battle not only on the field, where you have to take them heads on. And we very much support what you did with the Taliban and also what you did in Iraq. But it's also a battle on the hearts and minds of the younger generations. And for that, we do believe only fundamental structural reforms would be necessary. Reforms which would bring women empowerment, certainly in the Middle East, reform which would bring economic opportunities to everybody, not just a very, very small elite, and also reforms which would give impetus to academic freedom and to pluralism on the political side. This is all what you have experienced here. This is all what we have in Israel. So this put us together in a very unique position to work and hopefully see a new era ushered into the region. But it's not just these values and interests and the threats that bind us together. Also, there are some very, very, I would say, trivial things. And I don't know how many of you know that Israel is the largest trading partner of the United States in the Middle East, which we are also very proud of. We are a small country. We are 6.5 million, which is less than 2% of the entire population of the Middle East, of about 250 million. Yet, we buy 34% of all products, American goods and services sold to our area, because of our political system, because of the free market. And although right now we are called or considered as the only democracy in the Middle East, we would like to be, anytime soon, be called or be referred to as the first democracy in the Middle East. And hopefully we have new winds of change that sweep the area, and we welcome them. I think that what we saw in Iraq, what we saw in the Palestinian Authority, the elections there, which we very much helped, what we saw in a way in Libya, giving up their nuclear programs, what we see now in Lebanon can give us hope that the change may be there for good. I have said before that all those who are experts of the Middle East, the more you know the details, the less you can predict over there. So I'm still very cautious about where we can move to, but I would say that all the ingredients are there for a better future for the entire area. As it comes to Israel, and I would very much like to thank the American people and the American administration and Congress for supporting Israel and supporting its message. And our message is very, very clear and simple. Israel wants peace with all our neighbors. And for us as Jewish people, for us as Israel as a country, as a democracy, peace is not just a strategic option, if you will, it's a moral obligation. And we are willing to do a lot to make peace, to offer great concessions. We have done it in the past. In the case of Egypt, in 78, 79, when we signed peace treaty with Egypt, when President Sadat was in power. 95, we signed peace treaty with Jordan, late King Hussein, and we gave a lot for this peace. We are willing to take the risks and do the peace when we know that we have a partner whom we can trust, a partner which is trustworthy, which is committed to peace, and which is also willing to make the concessions. With this approach, we went to the Palestinians back in 1993 with the Oslo Agreement and Arafat. And up front, we gave up a lot of land. We allowed them to get a lot of economic benefits and other elements and attributes of self-rule. Unfortunately, we were betrayed, as you know, and not only they did not take it to build a new nation for themselves, but under Arafat, they tried to destroy a nation, which was ours. And we saw it in the last 4.5 years with what is called the Intifada. Intifada, by the way, is a misnomer. Intifada suggests some kind of a popular uprising. This was not the case. It was a top-down campaign of terrorism, which was initiated, instigated, planned, carried out by Arafat, whose legacy of bloodshed and terrorism and missed opportunities are unmatched. I was reminded, actually, when I was talking here with the faculty and the professors, and I think that also Dean Bartlett was there in the room, that one of my predecessors, Abba Ibn, said about Palestinian leadership that they never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. This was the case, and actually, if we break it down, it spans. It's not just a nice saying or a cliche. You can span it over the last century, and you see where were the Palestinian leadership at every major juncture in history. If we go back to World War I, the Palestinians were right there with these corrupt, failing Ottoman empires that preceded modern Turkey of today. Then World War II, they were with the Nazis. Cold War, they were with the Soviet Union, the evil empire. And then the first Gulf War, they were with Saddam Hussein. And today, they are with Al-Qaeda, or at least so long as Arafat was there. We hope there is a departure now from this failed leadership, and we hope that the new Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, which won a free and fair elections with an overwhelming results and popularity, who calls for the end of violence, we hope that he will be followed by his people. We hope that he will have enough power to restructure his own police forces, his own economy, his own political structure, so we can move ahead. As far as departing from the part and looking ahead, I would say that right now we are very much concentrating on leaving, departing, moving out of the entire Gaza Strip, and also a substantial portion of the West Bank. This is called the disengagement plan. It's a plan that was introduced by Prime Minister Sharon here to the President about a year ago, and was very much welcomed with enthusiasm, is endorsed by the international community, and we hope to effect and get it done by the end of this year. I think this plan came very handy now, as we have a common agenda, hopefully, to pursue, and from then on, if this disengagement goes well, and that is without Palestinian terror, then we can look forward and implement what is called the roadmap to peace, a 3-phased peace plan which will enable us, hopefully, to reach a peace which would be everlasting, which would be durable, a peace with good security for everybody, with good political support, with economic benefits, and that could be a real example of how the Middle East could be. As I mentioned, we are willing to move forward. We hope that the new Palestinian leadership will move forward, but there are still caveats, there are still perils. We are now well experienced. We've had these opportunities, or we had these, let's say, sanguine conditions before, only a decade ago, 93 to 95, 96, with the Oslo process. But the Oslo process failed. It failed because of two major reasons. That was lack of accountability. That means the Palestinians mainly were not held to their promises. When they said the end of terror, there was no end of terror. And there was no pursuit of terrorists. The Palestinians and this is what I mentioned, and they were given these economic assets, but also they were allowed to have their own security forces. Security forces didn't take any steps against the terror. We hope that this will be different now. And the second thing, we need to have a transparency in the process, and we have to have reciprocity. That means when Israel is willing to give up territory or make other concessions, we would like to see political concessions taken by the Palestinians as well. And this is part of the problem that we had before. There was a lopsided expectation where the international community, not here in the United States, by the way, but in other corners of the world, which laid their demands from the Palestinians to stop the terror, but for Israel, in exchange of that, to give up political concessions. And this is the wrong equation, because for stopping the terror, the right way is for Israel is to stop anti-terror measures. This is the right formula, because you do not give politically to terrorists, because this will never end the terror. Now, right now, we are in a situation where the Palestinians are trying to organize and arrange a ceasefire among the terror organizations. We are not a part of this ceasefire, but we told Mahmoud Abbas that if there will be quiet, if there will be no attacks, we will respond in kind. But for the longer term, we would like to see a plan which will dismantle the terror organizations for good by disarming them, collecting all their weapons, and making sure that they will not affect any more terror attacks. They still have a lot of terror factories, explosive labs, and other things that must be done with. If this is the case, we can move forward. But there is another peril, another danger from the outside. We still have Iran, we still have Syria, who work mainly through their proxy, Hezbollah, in trying to feverishly effect terror attacks right now. Just as we beginning to see some traction between us and the Palestinians, they are trying everything to derail the process and to derail any possibility of a progress. We just lost Israel a week ago, Friday, 5 Israelis in a suicide bombing in Tel Aviv, a nightclub, just Friday night, a week and 3 days ago. Terror organization by the name of Islamic Jihad, which has its headquarters in Damascus. They are the ones responsible. They had a local cell in Tulkarem within the Palestinian authority areas, and this cannot be. And what we ask from the Palestinians to have a sustainable effort against the terrorists. It's not just to deploy their troops. Deployment is good. It may be some deterrence, but they have to be proactive in looking after the terrorists, in casting a wide net of investigations, arrests, interrogations. This is the only way to work with the terror, and I think we have proven that. In 4 years, although we suffered a lot of casualties, more than 1,000 Israelis killed, and for us, if we put in proportion, I mentioned we are a small country, in proportion to an American population, it would be like 50,000 Americans die in terror attacks in 4 years. That can really wreak havoc on a country, on an economy. It can really create a meltdown of democratic institutions. Well, we have withstood that. We have been able to defend ourselves, to fight back, and we did it because we realized we must be proactive. You cannot, and here is also a lesson for the entire world, including Spain, I would say, that terror is not a plague, is not God-given. It can be fought and it can be won. If you show determination, if you go after them, if you take the war into their territory, as we did, and also it takes the entire population, which understand, and in Israel we do understand that we were under existential threat because of the terrorism. So the people came together And I say that, well, we have very good security and military forces, but the real heroes of the campaign of terror against us were the Israeli fathers and mothers who kept sending their children to school every day, knowing full well that the school buses and the school cafeterias were the first target for the terrorists. But by just showing up to work, going to the markets, going out to the movie theaters, that was a great defiance to terrorism, and it gave the government the time to really go on the learning curve how to find the best, most effective counter-terror measures. So we could do it. I believe here in the United States, you're doing it. We would expect the Palestinian security apparatus, security organizations to do it, because this would be the make and break. Let me wrap up by saying that we also appreciate the American involvement in the area. I believe that the United States is the indispensable country. People always ask me about American involvement, and I say that it's always greatly welcomed. The scope or intensity, I think, is pretty much determined by events on the ground. And we had successive American administrations tell us that they will be very helpful and instrumental in trying to bring the parties together, but they cannot replace the parties themselves. The decisions have to be made by the leaders, by the peoples who will bear the consequences of living and implementing those decisions and those agreements that are being made. Having said that, I think the United States and the entire international community has a great stake, and they can support by providing a safety net, I would say, economic, political, and financial. So, as I say, I think we can be optimistic, although cautiously so. There are still perils. We need, as a strategy, to isolate those negative elements, basically, as I mentioned, Iran, Syria, and the Hezbollah from the outside, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas, and other terror organizations from the inside, and to support these positive elements and support the Palestinian Authority and convince them that they must do away with terrorists. Israel stands ready to move forward. As we mentioned, we are ready to make painful concessions, and we will, in order to make a real peace for the entire region. I want to thank you very much for your listening. And now I think we have some time for questions. I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, how does the peace process and what's going on in Lebanon right now play into the opportunity for getting rid of the Iranian nuclear program?
Well, I'm not sure it's directly related. I think that what we see in Lebanon is within the context of what we saw after the successful elections in Palestinian Authority and in Iraq. I think that democracy could be contagious. People like to be free. I think this is the natural steady state, I think, of every human being. And when they see this participation, when they see that they have a stake, that they can really make a difference, I think people would like to do that. Lebanon was under Syrian occupations for 3 decades now. By the way, Syria does not recognize Lebanon as an independent state. Syria never had an embassy in Damascus, in Beirut, nor did they allow the Lebanese to open an embassy in Beirut. So this tells about where they're coming from. But if the Syrians will go out, I believe it will unleash a lot of energy, I think positive energy, among the Lebanese, and to put back a normal government, to regain their sovereignty, and hopefully in a democratic way. There is a danger there because in Lebanon there are also some Iranian troops, revolutionary guards, and of course it will be very, very important for them to get out as well. And also it will be important for the Hezbollah, which is now competing with the Lebanese army. And some say that they are almost as strong. but it would be very important for them to be dismantled, so to allow the Lebanese to rule themselves. If they will, the situation in Lebanon will change the Iranians' ambitions for nuclear capabilities, I don't see that. Iran is relentless in trying to obtain nuclear capability. I think that would be a major danger, not just to Israel, but to the entire region and much beyond. And they must be stopped. And nuclear Iran is unacceptable and intolerable, and it will change the entire political landscape of global politics as we know it.
Specifically, just my question was in the sense of a preemptive attack of the sort that Israel carried out on Iraq a few years ago, several years ago. How would that affect the other way around? Not how would Lebanon affect Iran, but the other way around.
Well, we're not dealing with any kind of military options right now, certainly not in public, but I would say that the best, but I would say that we really believe that the way to stop, there is a way to stop the Iranian nuclear program by changing the status. Right now, unfortunately, time works for them. We have to change it. We have to change it so we can delay it in a substantial way by taking Iran into the Security Council. Security Council, with its scrutiny, can really monitor much better the Iranians, and also will have them understand that there is a real price tag if they continue to defy and breach all the agreements and the entire international community. And with political isolation and the threat of economic sanctions, I think the Iranians will be much more careful. Also with the Security Council, they'll be able to do better and more comprehensive monitoring over their what's going on then. And the Iranians are very, much as I can tell, they are very sensitive and attuned to the international community. They do not want to see this pressure, because this political isolation, this pressure from the outside, also with the threat of economic sanctions, will further undermine their legitimacy in the eyes of their own population. As you know, it's not the most popular regime over there of the Ayatollahs. They took a very rich country and put it basically in bankruptcy. It's an oil-rich country. This is also why we don't understand why they need nuclear energy, as they say. But it is not a deterministic path. Some say, well, you cannot stop Iran because they are hell-bent, and they are, on getting the bomb. Well, they can be stopped, and it will take an effort of the entire international community. By the way, I believe that, just as an analogy, I believe the Iraqi war could have been prevented had there been a unified position of the entire international community. I think that would have impressed upon Saddam Hussein to change his ways. The same thing here. I believe if there will be a unified position, if there will be a unity of message with a unity of purpose of the international community, the Iranians can be stopped. And this is our position.
I think to follow from that point, I was wondering if you could talk about whether or not you think that the UN is at all a enhancement or an impediment to peace, and beyond that, whether or not it's a good idea for Israel to rely on UN help in its own security.
Well, unfortunately, we were not able to rely on UN ever. On the contrary, following the Sinai War in '56, we accepted a UN peacekeeping in the Sinai. 1967, when Nasser moved his troops to the Sinai, kicked out the UN forces without even any protest from them. So certainly they didn't supply any defense there. Conversely, when we did make peace with Egypt, as I mentioned, 78, 79, the UN refused to send monitoring. So we had to create an extra UN body, which is called the Multinational Force, headed by the United States. and other countries like Italy and others. But this is a group of soldiers which are monitoring the peace between us and Egypt, which is not a UN basis. We have some issue with the General Assembly, which is, you know, a body of 192 countries. If you look closely, I would say about half, if not more, are not democratic. And they vote like in groups. And although the decisions or the resolutions of the General Assembly are not legally binding, but they do have some weight in terms of PR, certainly. And Israel has always been singled out at the UN. There are thousands of resolutions against us, without mentioning the terror, without mentioning any other conflicts. So we cannot really rely on that. The Security Council is a more responsible body, maybe because the US has a veto power there, I don't know. But probably, and I know there are a lot of talks about changing or reforming the UN. I believe it's high time to do that, and we have some suggestions about it. But definitely, we do not see there any. It is an important organization, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure it is now best suited in its current build-up or structure to deal with real problems, whether it's problems of HIV or famine or other disasters, or certainly of problems of war and peace, proliferation, terrorism. For instance, there is no resolution which condemns terrorism in a very decisive way. There isn't even a definition of what terrorism is in the UN. When some try to introduce a very simple definition, like terrorism is the willful or intentional killing of innocent or civilians, you have many countries who oppose that, unfortunately. So you see there is some dysfunctionality over there. I think this dysfunctionality led some countries to work outside the UN. I mentioned one example in this peacekeeping forces between Israel and Egypt, which is outside the UN. But also there is this initiative which is called the PSI. It's Proliferation Security Initiative, where the US and few line-minded countries are working against proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and they are working in a proactive way to stop shipments of dual use and other materials which are not allowed. Through this initiative, a ship was seized from the east, I will not mention what country, to Libya. I think this was also one of what convinced Gaddafi to give up his program. Through this initiative, they stopped a shipment of Nudong rockets and missiles from North Korea to Yemen. All this is few countries who are determined to work against proliferations, and it's done, as I mentioned, outside the UN, because if you waited for the UN to take action and to get a consensus decision or resolution, you would have waited years if that would ever come. So it needs some reforms.
In your speech, you talked about reciprocal actions that the Israeli government could take, as well as the Palestinian Authority, in seeking peace. And I wanted to ask if the recent decision to end the policy of bulldozing homes in the Palestinian Authority territories was, first of all, was that an example of a reciprocal action taken by the Israeli government? And also, what sort of actions is the Israeli government looking for from the government of Mahmoud Abbas, as well as what actions is the Israeli government willing to give up as a form of seeking peace?
Well, we are sitting with the Palestinians actually tomorrow, and we have said that we are willing very much to depart from all the areas that possible, certainly the densely populated, the cities. There are 5 cities that are now in line for us to depart and for them to take control. And we said The moment they can assume responsibilities, we would like them to do that. We don't want to be there. We don't want to be in their cities. On the contrary, we would like them to be there and control it. And we believe that they can do, ultimately, a much better job than us in fighting the terror, because it is their own people. It's people that live in their midst. They can be very effective in doing that. So to the extent that they are willing to take responsibility and are willing to start an anti-terror effort on a sustainable basis, we are out. On top of that, humanitarian help. We're trying to help as much as possible with the economy. Even though we had this terror in Tel Aviv a week ago, we did not close the borders. We still allowed Palestinians to come and work. We still allowed Palestinian VIPs to travel in the country. We released, as a CBM, as a confidence building measure, or as a gesture to them, we released 500 Palestinian prisoners. And this is not without risk, because some of them, unfortunately, go back to the terror pool. We are willing to release more, and we will do more as we move ahead. I think that the departure of us from Gaza also should lend itself in a positive way for the Palestinians to take control, and they can show us and the entire world that they can be responsible parties once they take over Gaza. And they will be free and sovereign to do whatever they can. And we hope that once they take over Gaza, that they will help in creation jobs. I think for that the international community can help a lot with massive inflow of cash. But basically, they will have to gain control. So there is one authority there, one rule of law, and one gun, one security forces, and not all the other terror organizations.
What would you say is your best advice for young pro-Israeli advocates on college campuses?
I would say keep up the good work. Don't be intimidated, and keep the advocacy. Keep telling our story. Keep telling the facts. Unfortunately, these facts are not very well known, and there are some who, whether they're revisionist or not, but I see different classes or books about the Middle East, which come from a very, very, I would say, perspective which is very much one-sided, which I don't think is doing any service to the academic freedom. And but there are two sides of the story. Unfortunately, in the campuses that, or some campuses, I would say, we keep hearing the Palestinian narrative or the Arab narrative, which is very much skewed and not true. I mean, you have to open the books of history and read, and you see that what really ensued. So I think the best thing is, first of all, know your history and don't be afraid to tell it. That's the best advice I can give you.
Mr. Ambassador, Khalil Shikaki was here last week, whom I believe you probably know, and who's been a tremendous advocate for democratic reform in the Palestinian Authority. And he sketched out a series of polls that were very clear, which is that Mahmoud Abbas has been elected president sort of provisionally to deliver the goods. What goods are we talking about? Clearly, he means to deliver some sketch of a peace which will be acceptable in the long run in order to preempt the appeal of extremist groups and terrorist organizations. In that context, I'm wondering, why would the Israeli government not be willing to sketch out some kind of detailed plan for a peace in the long run, something along the lines of the Clinton bridging proposals, which Mahmoud Abbas has declared himself very eager to endorse, which, by the way, also has a majority in, according to polls, both in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority, and which would relax fears on the Palestinian part that in fact the disengagement from Gaza is just a step to annex large parts of the West Bank and secure the Jewish settlements there?
Well, we went out of our way to say that the Gaza disengagement plan is not a standalone. And this will usher us into the roadmap to peace. I don't think that we should preempt the roadmap. I mean, we already have a plan which was universally accepted, which was underwritten by the Quartet, which is the United States, Russia, the EU, and the UN. And in the roadmap, it has an intrinsic logic of moving in a gradual way because, as I mentioned before, we are now benefiting from experience. We have the experience of the failed Oslo. And Oslo was mainly failed because of lack of accountability, because of rushing forward without checking our backs that everything was implemented, that each side really made good on its promises. So we need to do that. We have a three-phased, and I don't think that if we now front-load the issues, the core issues of the permanent status, I'm not sure that the peace will be served or the process will be served. There is a win-win situation with moving forward, whereby the Palestinians can gain sovereignty, can get a state for the first time in history. It will be without, without the final borders yet. But we don't have final borders for now almost 6 decades. But by having a gradual process, and which will be supported also by economic joint ventures, I think that would lend itself into a much better atmosphere where the two parties can really deal with the core issues in a reasonable way at some times in the future. If you ask me right now, if we bring issues of final status, this may have a potential for really derailing the whole process. And I think this was recognized, not just by us, by the international community. So the roadmap, by the way, although it has some suggested timeline, but the roadmap to peace, and it's written there, right there in the beginning, the overriding principle is performance. It's a performance-based roadmap to peace. So I think this is what we should do, and we benefit here from experience. We have to be more careful, but there is a win-win where the Palestinians can get full self-rule and sovereignty over their own population with dignity, with economic benefits, and you still have some let's say, issues that will have to be dealt later. Yes.
At what point does educational reform within the PA come into play, and what can Israel do to ensure that a culture of terror is no longer taught to children?
Well, we hope that it would come to play very, very soon. And by the way, the roadmap also calls for a reform in the education system. Right now, we still have, unfortunately, education system and textbooks among the Palestinians which teach hatred, which do not recognize Israel, not as a legitimate state, not as a country in the region, which is very, very dangerous because it really poisons the hearts and minds of the younger generation who would be the leaders of tomorrow. This will have to change, and absolutely. And it's an educational process. We have done this educational process. When Prime Minister Sharon was first elected, he talked about our desire to peace and our willing to make painful concessions. Then he broke down what are the painful concessions, including the willing to go with a two-state solution, and certainly with the Gaza plan and disengagement and moving of settlements. This is very painful for Israelis. We do not see yet a commensurate process among the Palestinians. I mean, we see some measures, right? As I mentioned, these are tactical measures of ceasefire among the terror organizations, of maybe bringing down the attacks, maybe even some decrease in their state, in their own media incitement. But in a permanent way, what we want to see is dismantling terror organizations and changing the education system So they teach for reconciliation, for real peace between the people, and not just the governments.
I think we have to close this out because we're scheduled to only go until 1 o'clock. But I want to thank you all for coming, and once again thank the ambassador for coming here. I really appreciate your optimistic and very thoughtful remarks.
Thank you very much.